Bible in a Year Live, Chronological Project, Week 19, Day 8, New English Translation. When Solomon finished presenting all these prayers and requests to the Lord, he got up from before the altar of the Lord where he had kneeled and spread out his hand toward the sky. When he stood up, he pronounced a blessing over the entire assembly of Israel, saying in a loud voice, "The Lord is worthy of praise, because he has made Israel his people secure, just as he promised. Not one of all the faithful promises he made through his servant Moses is left unfulfilled. May the Lord our God be with us, as he was with our ancestors. May he not abandon us or leave us. May he make us submissive so we can follow all his instructions and obey the commandments, rules, and regulations he commanded our ancestors. May the Lord our God be constantly aware of these requests of mine I have presented him, so that he might vindicate his servant and his people Israel as the need arises. Then all the nations of the earth will recognize that the Lord is the only genuine God. May you demonstrate wholehearted devotion to the Lord our God by following his rules and obeying his commands as you are presently doing." Solomon dedicates the temple. The king and all Israel with him were presenting sacrifices to the Lord. Solomon offered as peace offerings to the Lord 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep. Then the king and all the Israelites dedicated the Lord's temple. That day, the king consecrated the middle of the courtyard that is in front of the Lord's temple. He offered there burnt sacrifices, grain offerings, and the fat from the peace offerings, because the bronze altar that stood before the Lord was too small to hold all these offerings. At that time, Solomon and all Israel with him celebrated a festival before the Lord our God for 2 entire weeks. This great assembly included people from all over the land, from Hamath in the north to the brook of Egypt in the south. On the 15th day after the festival started, he dismissed the people. They asked God to empower the king and then went to their homes, happy and content because of all the good the Lord had done for his servant David and his people, Israel. Solomon dedicates the temple. When Solomon finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the Lord's splendor filled the temple. The priests were unable to enter the Lord's temple because the Lord's splendor filled the Lord's temple. When all the Israelites saw the fire come down and the Lord's splendor over the temple, they got on their knees with their faces downward toward the pavement. They worshipped and gave thanks to the Lord, saying, "Certainly he is good. Certainly his loyal love endures." The king and all the people were presenting sacrifices to the Lord. King Solomon sacrificed 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep. Then the king and all the people dedicated God's temple. The priests stood in their assigned spots, along with the Levites, who had the musical instruments used for praising the Lord. These were the ones King David made for giving thanks to the Lord, which were used by David when he offered praise, saying, "Certainly his loyal love endures." Opposite the Levites, the priests were blowing the trumpets, while all Israel stood there. Solomon consecrated the middle of the courtyard that is in front of the Lord's temple. He offered burnt sacrifices, grain offerings, and the fat from the peace offerings there, because the bronze altar that Solomon had made was too small to hold all these offerings. At that time, Solomon and all Israel with him celebrated a festival for 7 days. This great assembly included people from Hamath in the north to the brook of Egypt in the south. On the 8th day, they had an assembly, for they had dedicated the altar for 7 days and celebrated the festival for 7 more days. On the 23rd day of the 7th month, Solomon sent the people home. They left happy and content because of the good the Lord had done for David, Solomon, and his people, Israel. The Lord gives Solomon a promise and a warning. After Solomon finished building the Lord's temple, the royal palace, and all other construction projects he had planned, the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, in the same way he had appeared to him at Gibeon. The Lord said to him, "I have answered your prayer and your request for help that you made to me. I have consecrated this temple you built by making it my permanent home. I will be constantly present there. You must serve me with integrity and sincerity, just as your father David did. Do everything I commanded and obey my rules and regulations. Then I will allow your dynasty to rule over Israel permanently, just as I promised your father David. You will not fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. But if you or your sons ever turn away from me, fail to obey the regulations and rules I instructed you to keep, and decide to serve and worship other gods, then I will remove Israel from the land I have given them. I will abandon this temple I have consecrated with my presence, and Israel will be mocked and ridiculed among all the nations. This temple will become a heap of ruins. Everyone who passes by it will be shocked and will hiss out their scorn, saying, "Why did the Lord do this to this land and this temple?" Others will then answer, "Because they abandoned the Lord their God, who led their ancestors out of Egypt. They embraced other gods, whom they worshipped and served. That is why the Lord has brought all this disaster down on them." The Lord gives Solomon a warning and a promise. After Solomon finished building the Lord's temple and the royal palace, and accomplished all his plans for the Lord's temple and his royal palace, the Lord appeared to Solomon at night and said to him, "I have answered your prayer and chosen this place to be my temple where sacrifices are to be made. When I close up the sky so that it doesn't rain, or command locusts to devour the land's vegetation, or send a plague among my people, if my people who belong to me humble themselves, pray, seek to please me, and repudiate their sinful practices, then I will respond from heaven, forgive their sins, and heal their land. Now I will be attentive and responsive to the prayers offered in this place. Now I have chosen and consecrated this temple by making it my permanent home. I will be constantly present there. You must serve me as your father David did. Do everything I commanded and obey my rules and regulations. Then I will establish your dynasty, just as I promised your father David. You will not fail to be a successor ruling over Israel. But if your people ever turn away from me, fail to obey the regulations and rules I instructed you to keep, and decide to serve and worship other gods, then I will remove you from my land I have given you. I will abandon this temple I have consecrated with my presence, and I will make you an object of mockery and ridicule among all the nations. As for this temple, which was once majestic, everyone who passes by it will be shocked and say, "Why did the Lord do this to this land and this temple?" Others will then answer, "Because they abandoned the Lord God of their ancestors, who led them out of Egypt. They embraced other gods whom they worshipped and served. That is why he brought all this disaster down on them." Foreign affairs and building projects. After 20 years, during which Solomon built the Lord's temple and the royal palace, King Solomon gave King Hiram of Tyre 20 cities in the region of Galilee, because Hiram had supplied Solomon with cedars, evergreens, and all the gold he wanted. When Hiram went out from Tyre to inspect the cities Solomon had given him, he was not pleased with them. Hiram asked, "Why did you give me these cities, my friend?" He called that area the region of Kabul, a name which it has retained to this day. Hiram had sent to the king 120 talents of gold.